There are only two types of rifleman users, those who have just started the game and those who are role-playing World War II. Everyone's favorite frontline infantry. If you just want a meat shield or you don't want to use much artillery. It's way too specialized to be useful, so spam these in the first campaign and just evolve it as soon as you can. Now that they don't need to spend one extra turn reloading, these guys just feel way better than medium gunners in every way. Its main feature is that it has 2 range, and that's about it. They actually have less armor piercing than the AT rifle, but they deal so much more damage that it just doesn't matter. Place in a forest next to a road for best ambush results. Considering this thing's job is to spot things for you, if there's ever something that sees further than a sniper, then there'll be no reason to buy snipers anymore. But as long as there's no other unit with a 3-range radio, there will always be a reason to buy these. Being able to one-shot infantry that are hiding in cover makes the flamethrower a very satisfying unit to use.
The flames will rise, ashes will fall.
It might have more range, but it has significantly less damage compared to the previous 2 flame units, so whether or not you want to use this thing over the others, that's up to you. Defensive units in general just usually aren't that good, but at least this can also repair a tank every now and then. They may be your first artillery unit with no evolution, but these guys are actually really good even later on, especially if you have lots of radios in your army. A jack of all trades artillery gun. For those of you who are too lazy to tow the field gun everywhere you go. A solid campaign unit and an absolute annoyance to face in PvP. Considering the regular howitzer cannot move on its own, I can kind of see this being a justifiable purchase. The rocket artillery lineup. Loved by recon tanks and sniper teams, hated by all other radios.
On the Fuhrer's birthday, a barrage of Katushka rockets will tear Berlin to pieces!
A field gun that's meant to target buildings for some reason. It's tanky enough to be put on the front line, and with how bad its mobility is and how bad its range is, it kinda needs to be there in the first place. It's an anti-tank weapon that only does 25 damage to a battle tank. This thing has the same gun as the AT gun, but it costs 110 ticks. I really can't recommend this thing. You might as well just buy a grunt and 2 RPGs. There we go, now we got an anti-tank gun that does more damage. Having more range doesn't really make this any better at ambushing since it still only can see 2 tiles ahead of it. I never noticed this until I did my playtesting, but the anti-air gun can actually shoot and move on the same turn. It has enough AP to be effective against planes now. Unless they allow this thing to one-shot planes, I can't see this thing being useful. It is such a hassle to tow around for so little reward. Now, in addition to shredding infantry and planes, you can also destroy light armor. Most people ditch this thing after the Guest Rebellion, others have to come back to it because rigged mode drains them of all their ticks. Sometimes this is useful on a map with lots of roads, and because it costs less than a supply carrier. But most of the time, you're going to find yourself using the supply carrier anyway. Since this is the only infantry vehicle hybrid unit, this thing still remains relevant after you've unlocked its evolutions. I genuinely consider this to be a downgrade compared to the biker. Giving it a cannon doesn't make it that much better. Considering the armored car's cannon wasn't going to kill much armor to begin with, replacing it with an autocannon so that it does better against infantry is an okay choice, but there still isn't that much reason to pick this over the biker or the final evolution. It's kinda hard to use, but on maps with lots of roads, the recon car is pretty good. The only problem is you can only pick between either this or the biker, so it's either one or the other. It might have 2 range, but it's still just a box of bullets. I wonder if they should move the flame tank to become a sub-variant of this. For when your light tank is shooting its cannon at infantry more often than vehicles. This may seem like a discount spag, but its autocannon can't shoot at aircraft and it barely does any damage to armor. Also, the recon tank exists, so there isn't really a reason to pick any of those light tank variants we just saw. It's a truck. It moves stuff. Being able to spawn infantry inside half-tracks and other transport units at the start of the game makes these a lot more useful than before. It's kind of hard to keep the infantry next to it alive to make use of its healing, but if you're spamming enough infantry, the ambulance does have its use. Just pretend this thing never existed. An extra radio to accompany your troops. It has a much stronger autocannon than the autocar and autotank, but its armor is still paper thin that an RPG can one-shot it, so use this thing like a glass cannon. You definitely want to start leveling this thing up as soon as you can. Anything that only moves 2 spaces on tracks just can't be considered good, especially when it only has 4 fuel. Not only is this the strongest armor in the game, it also has probably the best gun in the game, because it has 4 range and it can also shoot it and move at the same turn. Think about that. This thing outranges the AT gun, and it doesn't have to sit and wait one turn before firing. Giving this thing 2 range for both of its machine guns was a really good idea. This thing is actually a lot more useful now. This, however, still has 1 range machine guns, and it's a lot more fuel hungry than the multi-L, so this might actually be worse than the multi-L tank. Remember what I said about 2-tracked movement being terrible? Yeah, that's no different for this thing. It moves about the same speed as infantry, only if it's on a flat road or a flat plain. On the plus side, having 2 cannons that can fire on the same turn does make it decent when defending. These usually carry more supplies than an actual supply depot. They don't have a radio anymore, and I kind of wish that they would give it back, or just give us another radio Navy unit sometime. Use this to one-shot the battleships in surprise attack. Still a solid all-rounder of the Navy section. It also has 50% torpedo resistance now, which is a lot better than you think. This is actually pretty good now. All you have to do is make sure that you are firing before you move, and then this thing can stay hidden for a really long time and keep spotting for you even after it's run out of torpedoes. The AI get to spawn this thing with torpedo bombers. Us humans, on the other hand, only get seaplanes. The torpedo bombers are much better. It's meant to be the best anti-air unit of the Navy section. The problem is, most of the time it's going to get taken out by stray torpedoes, or at least taken out of the fight, because it doesn't have the destroyer's torpedo resistance. No longer an infinite source of spotter planes, still a pretty good artillery unit. This is probably the most annoying unit to level up. The fact that this thing costs 240 ticks and you still have to pay for planes afterwards makes this way too expensive to use. It can see stuff and die from flying too close to a destroyer. Because these things have to land on water and then be picked up by a ship, these are much more annoying to use than regular spotters. Its torpedo is really strong as long as you are targeting anything that is not a destroyer. They have gone from being the worst plane in the game to probably the best plane in the game. For cheesing rigged levels or helping you delete commandos, I still hope that we can build these from outposts someday. I expected this to be good. The problem is, most of the time, you're using the dive bomber in a map with Navy, and almost all the combat Navy ships have a passive AA that can only be triggered when you are within 1 tile range of the actual ship. That means the fighter can attack a destroyer or a battleship without taking damage, but the dive bomber can't. So even though the dive bomber does better against armor compared to a fighter, the chances are the fighter will still do more damage because it doesn't get shot first. And radio techs. They've been nerfed so much that I only see them used for sniping headquarters and outposts. It's a boat with a radio and a machine gun that somehow does 35 damage to a destroyer. A medium tank with a heavy tank's gun. These would be a much better multi-M tank compared to what we have. The thing about turrets is that you always know where they're going to be, so you can just go around it or use artillery to hit it from afar. Well, it does more damage now, but it's still a turret. The trouble here is not the turret itself, it's the fact that you're in rigged mode, so you probably can't afford much to attack it with. Just like the last turret, but now it's meant to shoot at ships. These guys used to be able to attack twice in one turn, but now they're just a regular panther. These don't show up in the forest campaign anymore, but I'm still including them because I got the footage for it for my last video, yet still forgot to put it in. It's a bear?